Lawrence Hayes thought he had done everything right. At 57, he was a man who stood tall on the mountain of his own success, a self-made businessman with calloused hands that had built an empire, brick by brick. Every boardroom victory, every sleepless night, every calculated risk had carved out his kingdom of wealth and influence. The world saw him as powerful, respected, untouchable. But behind the polished exterior, in the quiet moments of his lavish home, there was something Lawrence could not control, something that gnawed at him in ways he never admitted, not even to himself. Her name was Alicia. She was young, stunningly beautiful, and nearly 2 decades his junior. Elegant and graceful, she fit into his life the way a diamond fits into a velvet box, carefully chosen, deliberately placed. To outsiders, she was the perfect wife, the finishing touch to his carefully curated image of success. But Lawrence knew better. Despite everything he gave her, the gifts, the home, the comfort, the life most people could only dream of, there was a distance in her eyes he couldn't quite close. It was subtle, a fleeting look when she thought he wasn't watching, a smile that never quite reached her gaze, a silence between conversations that used to flow so easily. And yet, he never confronted it. He didn't dare. To Lawrence, appearances mattered more than doubts. So, he buried his unease under layers of grand gestures and expensive gifts, convincing himself that what could be bought could also mend. When Alicia's birthday approached, Lawrence thought he had finally found the perfect way to prove his love. A Tesla. Not just a car, a symbol, sleek, powerful, and modern. To Lawrence, it was more than just a vehicle. It was proof that he could provide the best, that he could meet her desires, that he could win back whatever distance had slipped between them. He imagined the moment in vivid detail, her eyes lighting up, her arms wrapping around him, the spark between them reignited by this ultimate gesture of devotion. And when the day came, Lawrence played his part perfectly. He handed her the keys with a smile, his voice warm and sincere. "Happy birthday, Alicia," he said, his chest swelling with pride. "I wanted you to have something that shows how much you mean to me." For a moment, she just stared at the gleaming car parked in the driveway. Her fingers hovered over the keys, as though they burned to the touch. Lawrence's heart raced as he waited for her reaction. Finally, she smiled, a soft, hesitant smile. "Lawrence, you didn't have to do this," she whispered. The words unsettled him, though he quickly brushed them aside. Surely she was overwhelmed, surely she was touched. This was a gift unlike any other. "It's nothing," Lawrence replied, his tone dismissive yet eager. "You deserve it. You deserve everything." She leaned in, hugged him, and he held her tightly, allowing himself to believe he had succeeded. That the Tesla wasn't just a car, but a bridge, a way back to the intimacy they once shared. But even as she smiled, something in her eyes flickered. Something he couldn't read. And Lawrence, desperate for reassurance, convinced himself it was joy. 2 days later, everything unraveled. It was a Sunday morning, the kind of crisp, bright day that promised new beginnings. Lawrence sat at the kitchen island, sipping coffee and scrolling through emails, while Alicia moved quietly through the house. There was a tension in her movements, a guarded smile on her lips, as though she carried a secret too heavy for her delicate frame. When she finally sat down across from him, her hands twisting a napkin nervously, Lawrence felt his chest tighten. "There's something I need to tell you," she said softly. He set his laptop aside, his heart thudding. "What is it, babe?" She hesitated, then exhaled. "I donated the car." The words hit him like a blow to the chest. "You what?" he asked, blinking in disbelief. "The Tesla," she continued, her voice trembling. "I gave it to Elijah, the preacher from the church. He needs it more than I do." For a long moment, Lawrence just stared at her, unable to process what he was hearing. Elijah? The 3-year-old preacher, who had only recently entered their lives. Why him? Alicia rushed to explain. She spoke of feeling a divine calling, of God urging her to make the donation. She described it as a spiritual act, a way of honoring her faith, of helping a young man destined to do great work. "I felt it was the right thing to do," she said, her voice soft, pleading for him to understand. It wasn't about the car, it was about faith. Faith. The word twisted in his mind like a knife. That car wasn't just a machine, it was his declaration of love, his proof of devotion, the embodiment of everything he had worked to provide, and she had given it away. Not to a charity, not to family, but to Elijah. Why Elijah? Lawrence's stomach knotted as he searched her face for answers. Something about her certainty, the almost serene way she spoke, made his skin crawl. This wasn't just about faith, this was something else. Something deeper. And in that moment, the seed of suspicion took root. Days passed, but the unease only grew. Alicia's smiles seemed forced, her words careful. She drifted through their home like a shadow, present in body but absent in spirit. Conversations barely skimmed the surface. She was distracted, distant, unreachable. At night, Lawrence lay awake, staring at the ceiling while questions circled like vultures in his mind. Why Elijah? Why the car? Why now? Finally, one evening, when Alicia slipped into bed early and drifted off to sleep, Lawrence's gaze fell on her phone, resting innocently on the nightstand. He knew it was wrong. He knew trust was sacred. But something inside him, something primal, something desperate, urged him on. His hand trembled as he reached for it. The familiar passcode slid under his fingers easily. He told himself it was just to ease his mind, just to silence the suspicions. But the moment the screen lit up, his world collapsed. Message after message, hundreds of them. At first, harmless exchanges about church, community work, little pleasantries. But as Lawrence scrolled further, the tone shifted. I can't stop thinking about you tonight. I miss you so much, God will understand. I love the way you make me feel. Every moment with you, the world disappears. Lawrence's breath caught in his throat. His chest tightened, his vision blurred. And then he saw it. A message from Elijah himself, written with the arrogance of youth. Give me the Tesla. Prove your love. Lawrence's hand shook violently as the phone slipped, nearly falling from his grasp. He clutched it tighter, forcing himself to keep scrolling, to keep reading, though every word felt like a dagger in his chest. There were pictures too. Smiling selfies, playful moments. Nothing explicit, but intimate enough to scream betrayal. Alicia's laughter, her warmth, her light all directed at Elijah, the young preacher. The boy she had chosen over him. Lawrence sat on the edge of the bed, the phone heavy in his hand, his heart thundering in his chest. It wasn't just the affair. It wasn't just the car. It was everything. The foundation of his marriage. The trust he had built. The years of devotion, provision, love. All of it shattered in the space of a few scrolls. She hadn't just given away the Tesla, she had given away herself. His mind spun with rage and disbelief. How long had this been going on? How many lies had he swallowed whole, blind to the truth festering right under his nose? The walls of their home, once symbols of his success, now felt like a prison. The furniture, the art, the luxury, all meaningless in the face of betrayal. For the first time in his life, Lawrence Hayes felt powerless. And beneath the heartbreak, beneath the humiliation, something darker began to stir. Revenge. This was no longer about a car, no longer about faith or appearances. This was about betrayal. And Lawrence Hayes was not a man who forgave easily. What Alicia and Elijah didn't know was that the storm had already begun. And when it broke, nothing would be able to stop him. Lawrence Hayes had always believed that control was his greatest weapon. For decades, control had built his empire, earned him respect, and made him a household name in business circles. But after the betrayal, after discovering the hundreds of messages, the pictures, the humiliating plea to give me the Tesla, control slipped through his fingers like water. The man who once dominated boardrooms now found himself pacing alone through endless halls, a king in a hollow castle. His wife was gone in spirit long before she was gone in body, and her betrayal had carved something permanent into his soul. Lawrence tried to drown it in routine. He tried to work longer hours, to pour himself into investments and projects, but every time he sat at his desk, her face appeared in his mind, smiling at Elijah. Every time he lay down at night, he imagined her whispering "I love you" into another man's ear. The obsession was suffocating. What began as a raw wound hardened into a singular focus: revenge. Unlike the rash crimes of passion committed by weaker men, Lawrence approached his revenge the same way he had approached business methodically. He contacted old associates, men who owed him favors, men who lived in the shadows where morality didn't matter. He requested information. Elijah's routine, his connections, his weaknesses. Nothing was left to chance. At the same time, Lawrence's demeanor in public remained calm. At business dinners he smiled, at charity events he shook hands, and to friends he played the role of the loyal husband struggling to salvage his marriage. But inside the mansion, behind locked doors, he rehearsed the details. He tested gloves, wiped surfaces, studied crime scene cleanup manuals. He purchased industrial-strength bleach and heavy-duty plastic bags, stored away in the garage under tarps. He was not going to make mistakes. If Elijah had stolen his wife, then Elijah would pay with his life. And Alicia had chosen her side. The night it happened was ordinary in every way except for the storm in Lawrence's mind. Rain tapped against the windows of the Hayes estate, a steady rhythm that seemed to mock his silence. Alicia had gone to bed early, as she often did now, tired from days she never explained. She didn't kiss him goodnight. She didn't even say his name. Lawrence sat in his study, staring at the gun resting on the desk. It gleamed under the lamplight, a reflection of the decision that had been weeks in the making. At midnight, he rose. His footsteps were measured, deliberate. When he entered the bedroom, Alicia lay sleeping peacefully, her face bathed in the soft glow of moonlight. For a split second, he faltered. She looked so innocent, so untouched by the lies she had told. But then he remembered Elijah's words. "Prove your love." His grip tightened. The sound of the gunshot shattered the silence, echoing through the halls. Alicia's eyes snapped open, wide with shock, then dimmed as she slumped lifeless against the sheets. The world went still. Lawrence stood motionless for several minutes, waiting for the weight of what he'd done to crash over him, but instead, he felt an eerie calm. There was no turning back. He dragged Alicia's body into the bathroom, his movements heavy but controlled. The tools he had prepared waited for him. He wore gloves, scrubbed meticulously, and followed every step as though executing a business plan. It took hours of methodical, brutal work. The bleach stung his nostrils. The sound of running water masked the grotesque reality of what he was doing. When it was done, he cleaned every surface until the bathroom gleamed. Her belongings were boxed and hidden. Every trace of Alicia Hayes, the woman, the wife, the betrayer, was erased from the mansion. By dawn, the house looked untouched, but it felt colder than ever. His lawyer, Richard Hamilton, was the first to know. Over the years, Richard had navigated contracts, lawsuits, and tax shelters for Lawrence. But this was different. "She's gone," Lawrence said simply over the phone. "She left me." Richard didn't ask questions. Not yet. Together, they crafted a narrative. Alicia had grown restless, maybe even unfaithful. She had left voluntarily. Elijah's name was hinted at but never directly accused. It was a story with just enough truth to be believable, just enough vagueness to survive scrutiny. Friends nodded sympathetically when Lawrence told them. The community whispered, but no one dared accuse him outright. After all, Lawrence Hayes was respectable, generous, untouchable. For a while, the lie held. But Lawrence wasn't finished. Elijah Carter preached that Sunday with fire in his voice. The young pastor's words filled the church, urging forgiveness, faith, and love. The congregation leaned forward, captivated by his charisma. But Lawrence sat in the back pew, his face expressionless. To him, Elijah was no preacher. He was a thief, a parasite. When the sermon ended, the crowd began to disperse. Elijah shook hands, offered blessings, and smiled the same smile that had once disarmed Alicia. Lawrence rose, his footsteps echoing against the wooden floor as he approached. Elijah turned, surprise flashing in his eyes. "Mr. Hayes," he began, his voice uneasy. The gun appeared before the sentence finished. The shot rang out, louder than the stained glass windows could contain. Screams erupted as Elijah collapsed, his blood seeping into the carpet where only minutes before he had preached salvation. The congregation scattered in panic, but Lawrence stood over the body, his expression blank. It was done. He didn't run. The police arrived quickly, sirens wailing. Lawrence was calm, almost serene, as they placed him in handcuffs. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. His face appeared on every television screen that night. The charges were clear. 2 murders, one coldly executed in his own home, the other in a house of God. The case seemed airtight. But Lawrence still had one weapon left. his money. The courtroom became a stage. The families of Alicia and Elijah sat in tears, clutching photographs, demanding justice. The prosecution painted Lawrence as a jealous, vengeful husband who had executed a double murder out of rage and obsession. They had evidence, phone records, witness testimony, inconsistencies in his alibi. It should have been enough. But Richard Hamilton was a master manipulator. He attacked the credibility of witnesses, questioned the timelines, and seeded doubt. He painted Alicia as a woman who had betrayed her husband, who had spiraled into reckless behavior, who might have provoked him. He whispered to the jury that Elijah was not the pure preacher they thought, but a man who preyed on a wealthy woman's loneliness. And most importantly, he reminded them, again and again, that Lawrence Hayes was a man of status, a builder, a benefactor, not a criminal. The jury listened. Doubt spread like poison. After weeks of testimony, the defense made its move. A plea deal. Second-degree murder instead of first. Reduced time in exchange for avoiding a costly appeal. To the shock of the victims' families, the court accepted. Lawrence walked away with a sentence so light it felt insulting, a fraction of what anyone else would have faced. The gavel struck. Justice bent under the weight of wealth. Outside the courthouse, protesters shouted. Reporters called it a failure of the system, but Lawrence walked free. A faint smile on his lips. He had won again. Yet victory tasted like ash. The mansion that once represented success now echoed with emptiness. Every hallway reminded him of Alicia's absence. Every mirror reflected the face of a man he no longer recognized. He tried to bury himself in work, but meetings felt pointless. He bought new cars, new art, new women, but none of it filled the void. Late at night, he heard things. The faint sound of water running in the bathroom, a whisper of Alicia's laughter in the halls, Elijah's voice echoing sermons through the walls. He knew it wasn't real. But it felt real enough to haunt him. His empire was intact, his wealth untouched. But Lawrence Hayes was hollow. In the years that followed, whispers about him never stopped. Some called him a murderer who had bought his freedom. Others called him a broken man who had lost everything. Business associates smiled politely but kept their distance. Invitations dwindled. His reputation remained intact on paper but fractured in reality. Lawrence himself withdrew. He rarely left the mansion, living in isolation surrounded by the wealth he had fought so hard to protect but could no longer enjoy. The Tesla sat unused in the garage, a silent monument to the betrayal that had unraveled everything. And every night, as he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, one question gnawed at him. Was it worth it? Lawrence Hayes had once believed control was everything. But control had driven him to murder, to destruction, to a hollow victory that left him more alone than he had ever been. Yes, he had beaten the system. Yes, he had walked free. But in the process, he had lost love, trust, humanity, and himself. The story of Lawrence Hayes is not just about betrayal. It is about the cost of revenge, the corruption of justice, and the emptiness of power when everything meaningful has been destroyed. So ask yourself, if it were you, would you have forgiven? Or would you, like Lawrence, have let revenge consume you until there was nothing left but ruin?